Hey everyone, here is how I put together Audrey's Christmas dress this year. It's a black velveteen with a gorgeous ivy lace overlay, and as always, all materials as well as timestamps are linked down below. So to get started, I used the Children's Corner Victoria pattern as a starting off point, but any bodice pattern would work here. Another great option is the Children's Corner Louise pattern. Now the neckline for bodice patterns is usually some sort of scoop neckline, and while that can make for a very pretty dress, I wanted to elevate this a little bit with a boat neckline. I just think it gives some elegance that scoop neckline doesn't quite accomplish. So to alter the pattern, I first traced the existing pattern down the center front, across the bottom, and up that armhole. For a boat neckline, the spot on the shoulder is going to extend out somewhat from where your typical scoop neckline is going to be. So I'm moving mine over about 1.5 inches. I'm just looking at the pattern, thinking about my kiddo, and picking up some distance that seems good. Don't overthink it. It is not rocket science. You can definitely do this. So from there, I lightly sketch the neckline connecting where that new shoulder point is going to be to the center front line. I'm just sketching out the overall shape, kind of tweaking it here and there, and then the thicker blue line is the shape that I like for this neckline. So then I needed to modify the back of the bodice so the shoulder straps are going to line up. I only needed to move that inside point of the shoulder strap since that's the only point I modified on the front of the bodice. So to start, I traced the overall shape of the existing pattern, same starting point that I did from the front of the bodice, and then I slid my new front bodice pattern underneath and lined up the bottom of the bodices, where that waistline is going. Then I used a straight edge to mark the new shoulder strap and the end of the shoulder strap for the back of the bodice at the same point as the one on the front of the bodice. I hope that makes sense. So to get the curve, I slid the back of the bodice, like the original copy, underneath, and I copied that curve. I also modified the shoulder strap slightly to match more of the original angle, so I'm going to ignore that top line. I think I was about 1/4 inch off. Once I was done with the pattern alterations, I grabbed my black velveteen and cut out 2 bodice fronts on the fold as well as 2 bodice backs on the fold. Generally speaking, a way to cut out fabric efficiently, so you've got less fabric waste, is to start working from one selvage edge to the other. So I'm folding up one selvage edge so I have a fold line for my bodice front pattern piece, and I was able to get all of my bodice pattern cut from one selvage edge to the other, so that means the rest of the fabric can be used for the skirt. And a friendly reminder, velveteen and velvet absolutely have a direction or a nap, so just pet them and see which way feels better, and that's how it should be when you wear it. So please be mindful of this when cutting out your pattern pieces. To cut the skirt, I took advantage of the fabric being rippable, so I just clipped one selvage edge and then ripped along. Super easy and accurate. So then I had 2 bodice fronts cut on the fold as well as 2 bodice backs cut on the fold. I took these 4 pieces and joined them together using my favorite bodice ring method. Basically, join all of your pieces with right sides together at the shoulder seams. After ironing up all of the seams, I had a ring of bodice pieces joined at the shoulder seams. You'll have your front pieces across from each other as well as your back pieces across from each other. And when you fold your front pieces so they are touching, the back pieces will fold in half and your bodice will just sort of come together. I simply love this method. So I matched up those shoulder seams and then gave the back pieces an ironing at that fold line. I want to put a crease in here. It's just an easy way to mark the center back. I'm going to put some velvet piping around the neckline from one of these creases at the center back all the way around to the other crease at the center back. And then I put a couple of clip marks so the piping bends easily at those center back points. So I'll do this at the beginning, sewing around the neckline, and then I'll put some more clip marks at this other center back so the piping curves up and I can sew over it. And this will leave you with a very neat piping transition into your fabric. I also put the piping around the armholes of this dress too. Then I put the bodice lining over top of the bodice front with that newly added piping. I'm going to sew with those previous stitches securing the piping onto the bodice facing up. It just makes life easier. And I'm sewing around the neckline as well as around each armhole. I happen to be using a zipper foot here, and that works fairly well with piping on my machine, but obviously a piping foot is a great choice too, whatever works for you. Then I clip the extra bits off from the piping and trim up the seam allowances. I also put clip marks around the curve so everything will lay nicely in place. Now here comes the magic. Turn the bodice right sides out by reaching through the front of the bodice and grab the back of the bodice and pull it through. Now it's going to be a little bit tricky initially around that shoulder strap area since this fabric is on the thicker side, but it will work. Just go a little bit at a time and be patient with it, and it will all turn right sides out. Then I took this little pointer tool and I used it to push out the corners, and finally I gave the bodice a really good ironing. I'm not worried at this point with keeping the nap directional when I'm ironing since I'm going around all these curves, and I will do a final pressing at the end and get all the velveteen to sit in one direction then. Next, I take up the sides of the bodice and open them so they are right sides together with the piping centered up. I'm going to join these together again, right sides together. And then I trimmed up the piping and the seam allowance and ironed that seam open, and then pressed the whole thing down. Finally, I'm attaching some of this velvet piping from one center back around the waistline to the other center back. Same concept with the neckline. Now I can set the bodice aside and move on to the skirt. So I first folded the skirt so the selvage edges are touching, and then I fold that in half again and again and again, and I iron those creases into the fabric. This is going to give me a very rough idea of where I'm going to put in some inverted box pleats. And I don't think that it has to be very exact here. I just wanted to do some inverted box pleats instead of some gathers on this velveteen. I think it's a little bit cleaner of an approach to get some volume, especially because I'm going to have an overlay. That lace overlay is going to be gathers, so I don't really want gathers on top of gathers. So I get all of those box pleats situated and pin them in place. You could absolutely baste them into place before sewing the bodice to the skirt, but I just went ahead and put those two steps into one. I'm sewing the skirt to the bodice lining, and I'm doing this with the right side of the bodice lining together with the wrong side of the skirt. I want the right side of that skirt to show like the front of the dress, you know, from underneath that lace overlay. So I pin that in place and I sew from one center back across the waistline to the other center back. And I'm keeping my selvage edges intact onto the skirt sides, which will be joined at the back of the dress. So Hong Kong seams are a great way to join velvet or velveteen, whatever thicker fabrics, but I figured what's the point in cutting off the selvage edges to do a Hong Kong seam, because the selvage edge is kind of like a built-in Hong Kong seam. You see what I'm trying to say? Anywho, then I finished the hem for the velveteen. I turned up about 1/2 inch across the bottom of the dress and ironed that into place. And then I turned about 6 inches and pinned that into place, moved over a little bit and pinned up another 6 inches and ironed that into place, kind of connecting those dots. And I continued that process across the hem. Of course, 6 inches is just what I picked, and I built that into my skirt. You do whatever works for you and your little one. But then I took that to my machine and I sewed it down. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we can bring on this gorgeous ivy lace. It is so pretty. So I love the idea of the scallop edge on top of the black velveteen. So I'm playing around with it to see how to get the netting part off of the lace. That little thread connecting the two came off fairly easily. I just gave it a very gentle tug and it came right off. And then I was left wondering if the scalloped edge was secure. I ran my fingers over it to see if there's any fraying or separation, and there wasn't. But it just seemed a little odd that I could get off the hook that easily. So that's when I thought about the idea of sealing up the bottoms of the threads with some fire. Yeah, I know I live dangerously. So I cut that bottom thread, leaving out about 1/8 of an inch of some overhang, and then I took a flame and I tried it out. I learned quickly to turn down the flame and that a little bit of heat goes a very long way. So I moved the lace to a table to make it easier to work with, and I went very gradually Easy does it here. As soon as I saw those little threads started to shrivel up, I took the heat away, and then I didn't get any burnt edges, and I could feel the tiny bumps of the melted, I don't know, I guess it's that nylon doing its job, since nylon does melt. And I felt fairly good about this situation. It does feel secure. If you are too nervous to do this, you may want to experiment with some fray check or a very small amount of fabric glue. Then I marked how long I wanted the lace overlay. The top of the scallops are going to be about 2¼ inches from the bottom of the black velvet, like from the velvet hem. So I'm going to cut just above this flower's center bud area. That just works out for my measurements. Of course, you do what works out for your little one and their measurements. The pattern for this lace does run straight across, so I kind of just lucked out and I followed the pattern and cut it from one side to the other side. Next, I put 2 rows of gather stitches along the top of the lace overlay and then gathered up the lace so it fits nicely around the bodice waistline. I start by pinning the middle of the lace to the center front of the bodice and then adjust the gathers until everything is evenly distributed and at the correct length. I'm overhanging the lace edges about 1/2 inch from each center back, and I'm doing this so I have some sort of way to attach a placket or to simply fold those raw edges and sew them down by hand. Either way would work, and I will get into more on that in a little bit. So I sew the lace to the bodice from one center back all the way around that waistline to the other center back, and then I could remove that visible gathering thread from the lace. Next, I moved the lace out of the way and put the velvet skirt together with right sides together. Again, I'm taking advantage of the selvage edges being intact as kind of a built-in Hong Kong seam. Otherwise, you could join the skirt together in the same manner and finish off the skirt with some Hong Kong seams. You could get away with French seams if you wish. It is a tag on the bulky side for Velveteen, but again, it is doable, and I have done this before. There are many different options. Like I say, it is sewing, so you do you. I stop about 5 inches from the waist seam and then turn the skirt sideways so I can sort of stitch off to the side, kind of creating a placket sort of thing without actually installing the placket. Then I'm doing the opposite. I move the Velveteen out of the way and sew the lace skirt together. This time I'm joining the seam using a French seam, and I have a detailed video on how to do a French seam that is linked down below. And again, I'm stopping about 5 inches from the waistline seam. So to finish the top of the lace overlay in that placket area, you could install a continuous placket, but I wasn't crazy about that idea since I didn't want a piece of solid fabric peeking through. So instead, I folded the raw edge over twice and I sewed it down by hand. I also sewed the bodice lining down by hand and then joined the back of the dress using these little cuff link style buttons. They are so pretty. This vintage style glass button with gold accent. I wasn't crazy about the cufflink style, but it is doable to work around, and it is worth it for these beautiful buttons. I have another video that goes over the details of how I installed these that is linked down below. So here you go, all ready for the holiday season. I hope this video was helpful. If y'all have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. And as always, guys, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.